the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. Jewish terror and murder in Israel, a small town's disputes with a Hasidic community, the star of this Bravo series speaks, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. Orthodox Jewish terrorism and murder dominated news out of Israel this week. 18-month-old Palestinian boy Ali Saad Dawabsha was killed in an arson attack against his West Bank home. His 4-year-old brother and parents were severely wounded in the attack. A grandson of the late Rabbi Meir Kahana was arrested as head of a Jewish terror network in Israel. 23-year-old Meir Ettinger was known to Israeli law enforcement and as recently as a few months ago had been banned for a year from entering the West Bank. Israeli law enforcement has not said if Ettinger has been specifically tied to the arson attack. The arrest comes amid a move by Israel's security cabinet to respond to Jewish terrorism by expanding the legal limits of what law enforcement can do with these Jewish suspects. They may now be placed under administrative detention and in some cases treated violently in order to, quote, apprehend those responsible for the arson. Internal Security Minister Gilad Erdan told Israel Radio on Monday that when it comes to bringing those responsible to justice, any method is kosher. Anything that is done when it comes to Palestinian terrorists, the same thing should be done when it comes to a Jewish terrorist. The arson attack stands out in recent memory for its having resulted in the death of a Palestinian. But Jewish terror that could easily lead to death is a frequent occurrence in the West Bank. In June, for example, another arson attack was carried out at a famous church that is consecrated as the site where Jesus provided loaves and fishes to his followers. And in an attack that Israeli officials aren't calling terrorism, perhaps because it involved Jewish victims, 6 participants in Jerusalem's Pride Parade were stabbed by an ultra-Orthodox man, Yishai Schlissel. One of the victims, 16-year-old Shira Banki, died after several days in the hospital. Schlissel had recently been released from prison after a 10-year sentence for a similar attack on the Pride Parade in 2005. Already, follow-on crimes have caught the eye of law enforcement. One ultra-Orthodox man has been arrested twice for incitement to violence by praising the stabbings on social media. He was first arrested soon after the stabbings, and then after his release, he praised Shira Banki's death and was arrested again. And then, in a crime that could be related to either of the 2 major attacks last week, the mayor of a small town in northern Israel had his car firebombed after speaking out against hate and bigotry. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., the ultra-Orthodox education system is going to be investigated following complaints about failure to properly teach required curricula in English, math, and sciences. New York City officials received a complaint about the ultra-Orthodox yeshiva system, which reportedly teaches only a smattering of math and other secular subjects to students, with a few hours a day for only a few years devoted to secular subjects over students' entire careers. Moving on to a story about ultra-Orthodox integration in a small town, or the failure to see that integration, and the lawsuits that have resulted. Rebecca Honig-Freeman reports part 2 of her series on Bloomingburg, New York.
The tiny village of Bloomingburg sits at the foot of New York's Catskill Mountains, with a population of about 420 people, though as we'll see, the exact number of residents has been called into question. In part 1 of our series on Bloomingburg, we explored the controversy over the Chestnut Ridge housing development, which, if completed as planned, could bring in upwards of 2,000 Hasidic Jewish residents to the village. Opponents of the development, including local officials, say the project was approved via improper and illegal means, and the village has filed a racketeering complaint against the developers, asking their project be stopped in its tracks. The developers, however, say it's not the real estate deal these officials and activists oppose, but the Hasidic community that's moving in, accusing local government officials of anti-Semitic discrimination. As we saw, though the future of the development may be in question, there are already Hasidic Jews living in Bloomingburg, mostly in rented homes in and around Main Street. And this week, we'll examine questions surrounding their general acceptance as residents in the village, and specifically their right to vote there.
I would like to invite the Board of Election by himself to come down in the houses and see and talk to the people.
Moshe Smilowitz is one of 27 plaintiffs, all Hasidic Jews, who have filed a federal class action complaint against the Sullivan County Board of Elections and its commissioners, accusing them of discrimination in allegedly seeking, quote, to cancel the votes of virtually every Hasidic Jewish resident of Bloomingburg.
I live here already almost 2 years, from February, that's 14th, if I remember good. And we were here, family, my kids, my married kids. We were challenged many times, different ways.
The Sullivan County BOE and the county attorney's office representing them would not comment on pending litigation, but the notice canceling the registrations comes amid allegations of voter fraud in the racketeering complaint against the developers, and refers to voter challenges filed back in September of 2014 by Anita Hope, who has been affiliated with the Rural Community Coalition, or RCC, a group formed in opposition to the Chestnut Ridge development and which backs the racketeering complaint against the developers. That complaint alleges that many of the Hasidic voters do not, or did not at the time, really live in Bloomingburg and were fraudulently registered in order to vote pro-development candidates into office. Sullivan County Undersheriff Eric Chibodi was asked to visit the purported residence of challenged voters.
Yes, we found many people living at the addresses. They were domiciled there. They did have all the everyday necessities of life in their residences. But there were a couple of residences that were vacant where people were registered, and we reported that back to the Board of Elections as well for their determination. But contrary to what was printed in the papers, there were a lot of people living in the village of Bloomingburg who were challenged.
And were those mostly Hasidic people who were being challenged?
I would describe them as that, yes.
The plaintiffs in the voting complaint allege that the challenges to their status are part of a larger village culture that has been openly hostile to the Hasidic newcomers, citing vandalism to the kosher bakery and a cross that was put up next to the Chestnut Ridge development as examples. Certainly, there is a general wariness among many villagers, said Robert Comforg, who works at the kosher bakery/grocery store.
Some people around here have heard them talking. Like people that live in my community think they just like take over the whole town when they come in, but really they haven't taken over too much here yet. So
yet being the key word. In a village of around 400 people, the Hasidic presence need not be very big in order to be felt, on Main Street and in Village Hall. Longtime resident and former deputy mayor of Bloomingburg, Dr. Clifford Teisch, who we met last time, is still stinging from the way the Chestnut Ridge development was approved, but he says he has moved on. Jewish but not Orthodox, Teisch maintains he is supportive of his new Hasidic neighbors.
They're my brothers, so to speak.
But he did have concerns about any one quote-unquote homogeneous group of people moving in.
Because of one, it's very easy to control the village once you have more than 100, 200 people. It can be a dominant factor in the school board, the school district.
In fact, fewer than 200 people even voted in the last election, which was held in March and in which Aaron Rabiner, who is Hasidic, was elected to one of 3 slots on the Village Board of Trustees.
I'm representing everyone here, and we're going to go slowly, positively in the right direction. I think things look very good.
For more on voting issues in Bloomingburg, New York, watch the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Rebecca. A new series on Bravo explored what it means to be the odd mom out, and Meredith Gansman spoke with the star of the series.
Okay, remember when all the kids were talking about that real-world scary stuff from the news? It was my family. We're the Truth Fairy.
First of all, don't scare me like that. I thought you had cancer or had to miss the nacho gala or something. Okay, I'm glad you were honest with me, because we're family, and that is why I am going to unhear what you just told me. We have each other's backs now, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm joined now by Jill Cogman, one of the creators and the star of Odd Mom Out on Bravo.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. So let's talk about the season finale. We've seen Jill Weber, your character, try to fit in with the jungle of moms on the Upper East Side. And where are we on the season finale tonight?
Well, I'm sort of in the ground zero for the Upper East Side moms. It's the benefit of their philanthropic season culminating in the Nacho Gala.
Right, not Nacho.
Nacho, New Yorkers Against Childhood Obesity.
Right. The Y is silent.
Yes, and you know, I think like many galas, they decided to do a theme to keep people interested, and they have the brainstorming session. In last week's episode of what the theme's going to be in it, they settle in on 80s prom. So we are having, in fact, a John Hughes black tie extravaganza. So everyone is going to look pretty hilarious and silly, but I think it's a really fun episode, and I think it's the culmination of a lot of the relationship tensions.
Absolutely. Now, I understand that the production of the prom actually coincided with your birthday, and we're kind of seeing a glimpse into Jill Cogman's birthday and the set of the show, correct?
You got it. I felt like I was not American because I didn't have a prom,
Right.
and it was this gaping hole in
And
my...
why didn't you have a prom?
I went to boarding school. We don't have proms. Like, they had a formal dance, but you're in the cafeteria. There's no, like, limos and hotels and all that stuff. So I felt like I'd missed out on this rite of passage, and I was going to rectify that for my 40th birthday. So my husband and I had an 80s prom, and because our show couldn't afford all the extras, we shot all the establishing shots, like from above, the crowd scenes dancing. That's all at my actual friend.
Now, let's talk about a little bit how Odd Mom Out came about and how the character of Joel Weber was developed.
It's really more when I was a new mom at 28 and I was way more insecure about what I perceived to be the mom scene, and I would sign up for classes with Sadie, my daughter, my 12-year-old, but when, you know, she was a newborn, and I felt like all these people had signed up together and they were all best friends and chicks and goddesses, and I would go into some of these places and I like sprouted payas the second I walked in, and I just felt that Odd Mom Out feeling. And even though I'm so past that and I really don't care, and that's part of the liberation of turning 40, those times were very lonely and kind of not a distant memory, and I really wanted to channel that and find the humor in those years.
But I feel like she fits in perfectly with the idea of a Jewish mother.
Oh, yeah.
She's loud, she loves cake, she often, she performs that of a doctor when without the license always. How is it bringing a different Jewish mom to?
Well, I like the idea of complicating my status as an odd mom out by marrying a WASP, which I did not do in real life. I'm married to a nice Jewish boy. But I felt like if you are even an odd mom out in your family and you have like a possibly anti-Semitic mother-in-law with a few little comments peppered in there, then you can't escape feelings of being odd.
For more on Odd Mom Out and Jill Cogman, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. Finally, this week on Up Close, when it comes to raising the next generation, what tools will we give them? Many would argue that one tool that's worked well in the past is now broken. Chronicle of Higher Education senior writer Goldie Blumenstick is the author of American Higher Education in Crisis, What Everyone Needs to Know, now out in paperback. And then, if you go to a special part of Tokyo, you'll see children literally playing with tools, hammers, nails, even fire. It's an approach we don't much see in the United States. Amy Fusselman explores this fascinating playground in Savage Park, a meditation on play, space, and risk for Americans who are nervous, distracted, and afraid to die. Here are some of the highlights from my interview with Goldie Blumenstick. Why do we have a sense that American higher education is in crisis? Why is this feeling out there?
People are concerned about the cost of college, even though there are still plenty of affordable options for college. I think something has entered the conversation a few years ago, the ROI, the return on investment, and somehow the conversation has become, is college worth it? And I think that's where the crisis kind of comes from. People started to have a lot of anxiety, a little bit about the cost of college before the recession, certainly after the recession, a lot more anxiety about whether young people are going to be able to, graduate and get jobs with their degrees. And so that kind of made a giant reverberation into the whole sort of notion of higher education.
But there is a large sea change that's gone on in terms of the cost, the various aid programs, and how they allocate to different groups, how much you're going to be able to afford if you're at various income brackets, and also within certain schools, within certain ideas of, what the top tier is and so forth. That's seen a lot of change as well.
I think the cost issue has definitely seen a lot of change, and part of what you're describing is one of the reasons the cost is going up is because a lot of colleges are spending a lot more on financial aid, and so if you happen to not be one of those families that requires financial aid, your costs you are paying pretty close to that sticker price. And a lot of other families are paying a different price. They call it the net price. The price after financial aid is counted in, and that's a lower number, but it also costs the colleges money, and in one way it actually drives the price of college up.
There are these kind of blow your mind away numbers, like $1.2 trillion in student debt, which is massive.
It's a giant number.
Unsustainable, a large part of it probably will never be paid back.
Let's think about that number. A lot more students are going to college than ever before. something like 40% of that $1.2 trillion is for graduate student debt, which a lot of students who go to graduate school then get, they get a master's degree or they get a law degree, and they can earn a lot more money in the market and they can repay that debt. The real problem with the student loan debt is for the students who, number one, didn't graduate, and now they don't have a degree and they have student debt. And particularly many of those students are poor to begin with. And so really the problem, the student debt problem, is really a problem for lower income students who don't graduate.
Right, and that's a large portion of the lower income students who enter in the first place, right?
It's a large portion of the default rates. Frankly, when you're a lower income student and you're trying to go to college, it's harder to go. You have a lot more other challenges. Most students work right now when they go to college. About a quarter of the students have families who are modern college students. This is not the image that we think about when, this from all the movies and, maybe for people lucky enough like me who were able to go to college, when my parents were able to send me and I was able to go at 18. But a lot of students today are not those students. I mean, there's a number I continue to find astounding that I wrote about with this book. In the United States today, a young person who is from a wealthy family is 9 times as likely to have a BA by age 24 than a poor person. 9 times. I mean, that's just an inequity in our society that is really kind of staggering. And that number's actually gotten worse over the last 20 or 30 years.
You can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish Channel on cable. You can also listen to the full audio of Up Close as a podcast available on iTunes or in your favorite podcast player. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, IOPTM Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast and the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.